Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. So these talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hi, if you're watching online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. My name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a fetching pink hoodie today. And every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, which is us offering you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Okay, we've got quite a few today. Welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, and UWE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So just a few notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can grab some tea or coffee, glass of water. We have a quiet space just next to this space. So if you need to take a break at any point, it's just to my left, your right, around the corner. There's a little door. There's a room in there with some sofas and bean bags, and it's reasonably well soundproofed. So if you need to take a break, you're welcome to pop in there. Not expecting a fire drill today. You hear a fire alarm? It's probably real. In that event, the studio team will direct you to the fire exits. But in any event, they are at the other end of the studio. Again, my left, your right, at either end. And then there are accessible toilets, including baby change. I don't see any babies here today. You never know. Over there in the corridor next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. So those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lawatim is your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, then please put your hand up the old-fashioned way, and we will send around a microphone so that the folks at home can hear what you're saying. There are some seats up the front. There's a gang hanging out at the back if you would like to join us. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. If you are following us on Twitter/X, then somehow you have not noticed that for the last 6 months we haven't posted anything. We're no longer using that. Please get your information elsewhere. All right, our speaker for today is Jim Wheale. Jim is a long-term studio resident and builder of immersive experiences. And today he's going to talk about his new project, Trepanner, based at Craswell Crags, the only site of cave art in the UK, and the challenges of exploring art and spirituality in response to ancient spaces. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jim.
I've been a studio resident for, I think, over 10 years now, so I'm like a geriatric studio resident, which is kind of exciting. I will speak and pronunciate louder. I can just talk louder if does that help? Yeah, can you hear me at the back? Great, I was saying stuff that doesn't really matter, to be honest. So I'm Jim. I am a bold 36-year-old man who aspires to play Earthburn Jim in the live screen adaptation. I'm going to talk about Trepanner, which is my new Arts Council funded project. In a nutshell, the project is about exploring the relationship between the human experience, spirituality, and physical spaces through spatial music and other creative technologies. And I will return to the specifics of the project later, what has happened so far, what's coming next, and God, it's hard to control my mouse across these two things. Great. And I'll share with you the very first piece from it. But first, I want to explain some of the thinking behind it. Over the course of my career, I've thought a lot about what it means to be human and what it means to be a modern human. So I started off by studying history and politics at university. I worked in international development. I spent time in Sierra Leone. I was a touring performance poet. I had a startup that was a storytelling chocolate business for 5 years out of this studio. And through that, researched a lot about what's called embodied cognition, how flavor is created and curated in the mind out of somatic, sensory, and psychological stimulus. And as part of that, I went to Peru to film a documentary where I came across this rock art, which is 8,000 years old, and in a remote canyon. And that was kind of my first exposure to this sort of art. My current company, Stormjar, with my wife Sophie, we explore storytelling through immersive experiences. And I'm a trustee of men's mental health charity Talk Club, and I'm a former Samaritan. The reason I'm telling you all of this is all of those experiences feed into how I think about being human. I think about human experientially, psychologically, somatically, sensorially, and historically. And I explore this thinking through making art, music, food, designing experiences, writing, and so on. The mission of Trepanner, as it were, is about unseeing the world as we've come to see it, and unseeing ourselves as we've come to see, unseeing the past through our modern assumptions, inherited ideas, cultural pressures, and limitations, and then trying to do the same with the future, so that we can look again with different eyes at what our future could be. And Trepanner is the distillation of all these experiences across my career into 2 personal beliefs. Where is the mouse? There we go. Belief 1, we risk losing as a species foundational human experiences and ways of thinking that are core parts of how humans have interacted, perceived, created, and thought throughout our species' history. These are being eroded away very quickly, and I am frightened of what is filling the void. The second belief is re-engagement with these foundational human experiences is crucial for a better tomorrow. So part 1 of this talk is called Hyperstitions and Info Hazards. So a hyperstition is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a bit weirder. It's more about ideas than predictions. It refers to fictional ideas that become real because people believe in them or act as if they're real. Let's say someone invents a myth, a conspiracy, or a sci-fi concept. Over time, that idea influences behavior and decision-making, and eventually it starts to reshape the world. An example I can give you is in Star Wars, there's a hover bike. Recently, someone actually built a real working functional one of those. It starts as a myth, it can end up in culture. And these ideas can be things like the divine right of kings, it can be political, it can be economic, like a cryptocurrency, or ideological, like a national myth. And hyperstition as a concept was developed in part by a fellow called Nick Land, whose work later became foundational to parts of the alt-right movement. His writings argue how ideas can be talked into existence, normalized, and eventually rendered invisible, treated not as ideas, but as reality itself. Another framework that I find useful comes from philosopher Nick Bostrom, who coined the term information hazard, an idea that is dangerous to know. This includes things like how to build a nuclear bomb, maybe a volatile state secret, gossip that could destroy someone's life. Some information has the potential to cause harm just by being known. A thought experiment here that's quite fun, it's worth a Google, is called Rocco's Basilisk, and it's a thought experiment that acts like a mimetic trap. Once you understand it, you can't unknow it, and that knowledge becomes a kind of burden. It's worth a Google. It's kind of like a bedtime paradox. One example I would argue of a hyperstition and an information hazard is the idea of accelerationism. It proposes that the best way to overcome the problems of capitalism or modernity is to intensify them, to speed up technological change, market forces, social upheaval, not in order to reform, but to push systems to their limit until they collapse or transform. And this idea has been co-opted by anti-capitalists, by capitalists, by technologists, by biohackers, by transhumanists, by Christian fundamentalists, because it is a sticky, seductive idea. It is betting big with conviction. It is a scorched earth, burning bridges, no holds barred strategy. And it feels like taking decisive, heroic action. And it is another idea from Nick Land. I think accelerationism is really dangerous. It's a hyperstitional information hazard. It spreads, mutates, and encourages anti-empathetic worldviews. It undermines compromise. It dismisses care and understanding. It reframes catastrophe as progress. And once you hear it, once you internalize the logic, it's hard to not feel its pull. It's malleable. It works for any ideology. It's kind of a weaponized imagination. And so I believe accelerationism contributes to this sense of inevitability that so many of us feel today, that AI is going to consume all culture, that the climate emergency will worsen and spiral, that inequality will grow without end. Accelerationism presents these as inevitable paths, even desirable ones. As such, I think it's really crucial that we look back to see, well, how did we get here? If we want to unsee the future, to imagine a future that isn't locked into our current assumptions, we also have to unsee the past. That means looking at our ancestors not as primitive or less than, but as what they really were, which is fully intelligent, creative, experimental humans like us. Our culture has internalized a number of powerful misconceptions about prehistory. The most enduring of these are that early human life was inherently nasty, brutish, and short, to quote Hobbes. That inequality is a natural byproduct of civilization and technological progress. That agriculture triggered cities and inevitably led to hierarchy. That modern humans represent a linear upward progression from primitive ancestors. That uncontacted tribes today are Stone Age remnants. These assumptions shape how we think about the present and what futures we believe in, and what futures we also think are possible. In The Dawn of Everything, anthropologist David Graeber and archaeologist David Wengrow dismantle many of these myths. Drawing on decades of archaeological and anthropological research, they show that people have always experimented with different social arrangements, including seasonal shifts between hierarchical and egalitarian forms. Cities existed long before agriculture, and in some cases were not always organized around kings, priests, and tax collectors. Inequality is not an inevitable outcome of population growth or urban complexity, and freedom as they define it, freedom to move, to disobey, to imagine, was once more widely distributed than it is today. This reframing is important not only for how we view our ancient ancestors, but for also how we treat indigenous people today. So unseeing the noble savage and the Stone Age tribe is a really important activity, in my opinion. This trope, the idea that pre-modern humans were either childlike and innocent or brutish and uncivilized, is a product of colonial ideology. It persists in the way we speak about uncontacted tribes and indigenous groups today, as if they are frozen in time or living fossils. But this framing is deeply misleading because it implies stasis, that these groups have not changed or adapted over time. It presumes technological inferiority equals cultural inferiority. Wow, that's a mouthful. It ignores agency. People often choose isolation as a survival strategy in response to violence, disease, or exploitation. And it frames modernity as inevitable. One of the things that's come out of the Amazon recently with ground-penetrating radar and the satellites that are used to map the Earth is evidence of huge city structures all across the rainforest that were once there that have now been lost. We must be careful not to romanticize hunter-gatherer societies, but also not to diminish the richness and variety of human life across time. Indigenous communities today are not relics of the past. They are participants in the present, often holding insights and strategies for sustainability, cooperation, and knowledge transmission that modern societies lack. And this process of unseeing has helped me free my imagination to think differently. Personally, is about how I think about music. I'm a self-taught musician. I am not a virtuoso by any means. I'm good at music production and composition, and that's allowed me to play with other musicians, score things, occasionally get commissions, and that's great. But over the last few years, I was really struggling with the role that music played in my life, feeling, frankly, like my value as a musician was kind of worthless. And this wasn't something I could really articulate. I would describe it more as a feeling of kind of doubt or shame. And then I read an anecdote about the role that music plays in different tribes around the world. And it snapped something inside my mind. So for instance, the Sami people, who are an indigenous people in northern Scandinavia, have this tradition. I'm not going to pronounce this right. It's yolks, I think. It is a personal, wordless song that represents an animal, a person, or a place. It's not about them, but it is sung as them. It is that person, place, or creature in musical form. It is sung in many contexts used for reminiscence, mourning, heartbreak, and so on. Another are the songlines of Australian Aboriginal people, which embed laws, geography, cosmology, family stories, all across the landscape, physically, geographically. These different relationships to music help me unsee the very capitalist lens with which I saw the value of my own music, in which streams, downloads, purchases, tickets sold was the only way that I measured myself. I wasn't really reflecting on how it made me feel or what I thought it said. Music has carried all the anxieties of a wobbly startup for me since I was 16, and to be free of that is joyful. And coincidentally, the same thing has happened to me with poetry. 11, 12 years ago, I was a touring poet. I was performing in slams, I had a book out, and somebody close to me told me, "You'll never make a living doing that, grow up." And I just stopped writing. And other than the odd commission, I haven't really written any poetry in the last 10 years. And I'm pleased to say this project has got me writing again, and I'll be ending this talk with the first poem I've written just for me in over 10 years. Okay. So I'm going to need to tee this up because the slides start moving. So let's talk about the first artists then. Humans made art in caves for at least 45,000 years, until surprisingly recently. Some Aboriginal people created rock art, that is, art on rocks or cliff faces, well into the 19th and 20th centuries. So when I speak about foundational human experiences, I believe making art in caves is something we have done as a species for 45,000 years at least. Given modern humans, that is to say Homo sapiens sapiens, are roughly 160,000 years old, 45,000 years is like a really big chunk of our entire existence. And there's a tendency to other these artists. That's Aboriginal, relatively recent, it's about 6,000 years old. There's a tendency to other these artists as if they are somehow separate, more ape-like, but they are cognitively, creatively, intellectually identical to us. And this is reflected in the complexity of their work. Paintings require pigment, fire-like to see. These are complex technologies and tools to take into the hazardous space of a cave. Further, many paintings are done in a style known as bas relief. That is to say, they use the topology of the cave as part of the work. You can see here, this bison has been etched into the actual flow and movement of the stone, making a kind of 3D illustration. In addition, some paintings are drawn in such a manner so that they animate under firelight as a kind of proto-animation. This process as well was likely accompanied by song, chanting, or instrumentation. How can we know that? Well, across many sites in Europe and Russia, the paintings appear in the most resonant parts of the cave, suggesting that sound helped people navigate and perhaps even see in total darkness. A musicologist called Igor Rezenkov discovered this, and he proposes that artists may have used acoustic resonance both as a practical tool and a creative one, emulating the calls of animals that they depict. This is a bone flute, of which we have found many from all over the world. What's crazy is a number of them are essentially in the pentatonic. So when they're played, they sound incredibly like Western music. But you can also use these to create all sorts of animal calls as well. So it's likely they had a multifaceted purpose. Okay, so who are these paintings for? Well, archaeologist David Lewis Williams argues for a shamanistic interpretation of cave art, that by applying neuropsychology research on altered states of consciousness, ethnographic research on shamanic practices, especially of contemporary hunter-gatherers, he argues abstract marks at cave sites are consistent with what's called entoptic phenomena, the shapes and experiences that our nervous systems make or create in our eyes or in our brains under altered states of consciousness, such as hallucinations, sleep deprivation, fasting, and so on. And there are a handful of sites with depictions of therianthropes. So these are the kind of entoptic phenomena that are consistent across many studies of people in altered states of consciousness and how they correspond to cave art and portable art. That's art, that's like little statues, handheld things. I'm in the wrong side of the slide. There we go. To kind of further substantiate this, there are a number of depictions of therianthropes, that is half animal, half person, that appear across caves in Europe, which is suggestive of a spiritual, shamanic, religious use of caves. He argues that neuropsychology shows how a cave with its sensory deprivation and tunnel shape mimics the journey undertaken by a shaman into the other world and their subconsciousness. And so this isn't even mentioning like the portable art. I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So these Venus figures, we found nearly 200 so far. They range over a 20,000 year span. There's some arguments that they are kind of like the Barbie doll of this period. The other arguments is that they are a goddess and a worshipping symbol. What's crazy to me is you have this portable art, you have burial sites like this one at Kostensky in Russia. This burial, which is sort of nearly 30,000 years old, there are 4,000 beads that are made of mammoth ivory. In recreations, each one has taken 45 minutes. So there's an astonishing amount of effort and care that has gone into this person's burial. But for me, it's not really the paintings of the animals nor the portable art or jewelry that are the most astonishing things about these people. So in the First Signs, Genevieve von Petzinger catalogues 32 symbols that span a 30,000-year period from about 48,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago that appear in 400 caves, thereabouts. They're discovering new ones all the time across Europe. And this is where Ben Bacon comes in, who I'm hoping is watching, and I hope I am about to do him justice. He is an extraordinary person who's involved in this project. Ben is a linguist and an artisan kind of craftsman, woodworker, and he is working on cracking what these symbols mean. And he has cracked a couple of them. So the first one, well, really, the first thing to say is the first symbol that was cracked proposes that this sequence of dots is like a lunar calendar. It shows you what moon phase this animal gives birth, and that the Y symbol, which can be seen in these pictures, depicts that that is the time that they give birth. And his team have used statistical analysis. They've used a lot of data analysis to compare and contrast these images, where that would be in the year if you took that as a lunar calendar, and the modern equivalents of those animals and when they give birth. His new work, which I'm not entirely sure I'm even allowed to talk about, because I don't know if it's in the public domain, they've deciphered yet another symbol. And not only is it a symbol that kind of showcases that an animal is with child, i.e. this is a spawning ground, but it's a combined symbol, which means as a proto kind of writing system, they had quite complex sets of expression. The thing to bear in mind as well is these symbols were used over a period of about 20,000 years, consistently, it seems. The oldest language we know of is Mesopotamian cuneiform, which is about 5,000 to 6,000 years old. So this speaks to our capacity to communicate across large geographies and timescales. And I think that has big implications for us in terms of the storage of nuclear waste, forever chemicals, climate change, and so on. But these people, these biologically identical people, aren't even the first artists. So this is a relatively recent discovery, that this art was made by a Neanderthal 66,000 years ago in a cave in Spain. That is a different species. And we're very closely related. There are people who carry Neanderthal DNA, We likely interbred, traded, all sorts of things with them, but it is a different species that has created art. And there are many arguments going on in the kind of journals of archaeology and anthropology at the moment about what constitutes evidence from other hominins from around this period that seemingly had creative expression. I want to give you another example here, which is these eagle talons are from a site in Croatia. They're 130,000 years old, and they bear the marks of being strung for jewelry, of being tooled and etched for it. So you don't just have visual expression in terms of art, you have visual expression in terms of fashion, in terms of kind of probably dance, movement, potentially music. They also had the capacity for speech. Whether or not they spoke, we don't know. We don't know if they had a language, but physiologically they had the capacity. I want to give you a couple more examples from here in the UK. This is 250,000 years old. This is by another species, Homo erectus. And that is a hand axe that has been carefully knapped to preserve a fossil at its center. That is a complicated and difficult thing to do. That is an aesthetic choice. And we know that because it's not the only one we found. This one is from 400,000 years ago from Swanscombe, and that is a sea urchin fossil at the center that's been preserved in the tool. So art is likely a multi-species practice, deeply interwoven with spirituality, toolmaking, and society. And so if we want to imagine new futures, futures that are not locked into capitalism, hierarchy, or scarcity, maybe we start here. Maybe we start with art and the role that art plays, not in the myth of progress, but in the deep continuity of human creativity, adaptation, and care. To me, that's what unseeing is all about. It's not about rejecting the present, but about loosening its grip and remembering that humans have always had the capacity to imagine otherwise. Accelerationism promises a future of musicianless music and painterless paintings and actorless performances. Unhuman expression is a dangerous hyperstition that threatens to become a reality. So how do we resist this? Well, I think it's by embracing what I'm calling foundational human experiences. I do not have a prescribed list or catalog of what these are, but I think a good starting point is to return to the cave. So some foundational human experiences I'm thinking about is that art making in a cave is one, that tool making is one, that performance and altered states are examples, and that conversation and dialogue is another. So this brings me to, what is this project and why am I telling you about it? So this is Craswell Crags. It's not far from Sheffield. It is the only site in the UK with cave art. There are etchings and tools and portable art that have been found there. It is a huge privilege to be able to go and make art in those spaces. In France, it is forbidden to do any recording, any sound recording, any photography, any videography, any kind of performance in the spaces with cave art. So whilst I'm going to be visiting those spaces, which is fantastic, I can't actually capture anything while I'm there. So to be able to spend 2 days in this space with a tranche of artists, it's going to be great. So in July, I'll be spending 2 days here with 14 collaborators made up of artists, musicians, creative technologists, instrument makers, coders, archaeologists, and linguists, alongside the experts from Craswell Crags, to think and make. And my intention is to develop a live show and perform it, release music, write poems, make video essays, build instruments, and engage in dialogue with others, and record those in some form, maybe through podcasting or writing. And this is really where I want feedback from the people listening as to how they would want to engage with this. I haven't decided the best way to distribute. I know I'll be putting out video poems. I know I'll be putting out music and interactive audio experiences. But if you want to follow this project, really, I think the starting point is going to be a mailing list. And I was hoping to have a website up today, like even a basic one, and I failed to do that because this has taken me ages to think through. So if you would like to be informed, please provide me your email address. I'll leave a book here and a pen, and I will sign you up that way. And that will be where I release it. I'm still thinking through whether any of this I even want to be something that's charged for, whether it's something I want to open source, whether the tools that are made are put in the public domain. There's a lot to kind of think through. And so to kind of start myself thinking through it, I did a bit of a dry run before we go to the caves in July. This is Merivale Stone Circle, which is a stone circle in Dartmoor. It's quite an unusual one. You have a series of small circles and then these really long columns of stones in 2 columns, and more or less the moon sets at one end and the sun rises at the other. It's pretty special, unbelievably beautiful space. There are about 1,300 stone circles and monoliths across the British Isles. They clearly demonstrate complex reasoning with astrological alignments, staggering engineering. Parts of Stonehenge have recently been discovered to have come from a remote Scottish island. And they demonstrate a deep and widespread belief system across the British Isles. And we don't know who these people were, really. That's as much as we've got. So the first thing was hiking up to this, carrying a spatial sound system and a projector screen and lots of instruments and a drone and camera. And Jeremy, who showed me this place, who's an archaeologist and a dear friend, was also my pack mule. And I feel bad for him on that, because that was hard, it turns out. So thinking about how we get technology into these spaces and leave no trace is an important consideration. Not putting a projector screen up on a hill that has quite a large gust of wind down it was also a painful learning. But it's been really great to get out in the field and create in response to a space. So we built a spatial sound system that pointed out at the stones, and then there was an ambisonic recorder at the center which captured that sound. So the music, when it is released, is a spatial live recording in situ. And that's kind of the way that I see this working, is using spatial sound systems to capture a stereo binaural piece of music that I can then share. It just inspired me to write something. So this is the poem that will go over the video, and it's scored as well. And I'm not sure when that will be finished, but in the next few weeks, I would hope, and that will go out via the mailing list. But I wanted to do this poem to kind of cap off this talk, if that's okay, because it is the first time in a long time that I've done that. I don't even have a name for this yet, so if you think of a good name, please let me know. I've come to Merivale, a stone circle within 2 columns of standing stones, to think about whether spirituality is an intrinsic part of being human. By that I mean hardwired biologically. But from that kernel, I ended up thinking more about trash. For me, the study of history is like a camera lens in my hand. It's mechanical and tangible. And when I twist, the aperture opens and light pours in. And thus time compresses and distances I thought unreachable collapse but into forced perspectives. You can see this phenomena with the naked eye, the strata in wrinkled rock faces, aeons suspended between millimeters. But this clarity comes at a cost. To have enough light to see, we must reduce our focus, and so our area of attention is sliced into slithers. And further, to preserve the vision, the snapshot must be beaten like hot metal into place, into a picture, a measurement, a page, and then treated with digital or chemical alchemy to transmutate the moment into matter, into paper, into silicon, into data. And once data, well, we say it is known. And so history and the study of history gives the illusion of knowing the whole picture, even though it makes no claims about having the whole picture, because measurement is a palliative substitute for the truth. But the truth is the picture was never ours to see. We can only infer it, which is hard to do authentically when looking back through our prescribed lenses of modernity. And whilst we can narrow the aperture to sharpen the image and push the ISO harder and harder, the image will either grow darker or artificial data is introduced, and so the ink writes itself and we trick ourselves into hunting patterns in the void. I don't think we can truly see that these beautiful standing stones are trash. That priceless museum displays too are trash, that the 60,000-year-old handprint deep in a Spanish cave, radiant, extraordinary, impossible, made by another species, is trash. because they serve their intended purpose and now purposely linger long after their makers have disappeared, compressed in the strata. And all utility of these physical things has evaporated. Our inheritance is only the trash, and archaeology is the study of this trash. And I too marvel at these places, at exotic rubies and esoteric art, at ruins in the desert, in the jungle, in the mountains, under cities, in the fields, sunken rivers and oceans. But these items were not intended for a glass box or a red rope for the price of admission. They were not made for you or I. They are rubbish that was left in the desert, in the jungle, in the mountains, under cities, in the fields, sunken rivers and oceans. Their intention was never for our possession. And just as a photograph is not the whole picture, nor the people contained within, our measurements fail to establish the true distance between us and them. So what good then is looking back, framing up, focusing, and taking photographs? Well, I believe to really look back requires taking off masks, putting down ways of seeing embedded in us by the modern condition. For instance, how society measures you, how it measures itself. And so at Merivale, I tried to unsee. I tried to unsee our mechanical clock, unsee time as a commodity, unsee time as a currency to be spent, saved, or wasted, and see my art's value only in numbers of streams, of downloads, of purchases, and see music as a product instead of a way to live, and see the notion that spirituality must be instructed only by the ordained, and see that there is only capitalism, that there will only ever be capitalism, and see that the camera that I hold is a tool for truth, and instead see it as an object that will outlive me, unrotting in the ground, its unskeleton undying, that this object's permanence is my choice. I am responsible for its being. What I mean is microplastics, nuclear waste, climate change, munitions, litter. Do these words really sound like buried treasure? Will our children's children stare in wonder as another Starbucks sign is dredged up? Will they marvel at a takeaway container still perfect after a millennia? Marvel at a landmine or a lampshade or a lunchbox or a lens cap? Will they gather in the ruins of petrol stations and the husks of shopping centers to explore their spirituality, to pray at these battery-farmed, factory-line objects and places? Will they seek them out to restore themselves? I think not. I think we are losing something core to being human, losing to hyperstitional influences, losing to intellectual cynicism, to the commodification of the spirit, seeing only narrow slithers of focus, that there is only capitalism or communism or anarchism. God forbid we think of a new system, something that doesn't end in an ism. Will I only amount to a product of products? When I buy landfill unwittingly, am I really buying me, temporarily holding my real legacy before I discard it, and the vast majority of my legacy unthinkingly? Every toothbrush, every sticker album, magazine cover toy, shrink-wrapped piece of plastic trash that I can't recall, how much have I thrown away over my lifetime? When will the last piece of trash I'm responsible for stop taking up space? What if it's millions of years? Then that trash, across deep time, is the majority. It's the majority of me. See, the trash we inherit, some of it really does glitter with mystery. Ruins, temples, stone circles, buried treasure. But that won't be true for future generations. There'll only be one mystery. Why? Why are there microplastics, climate change, nuclear waste, munitions, litter? Why are they left in the desert, in the jungle, in the mountains, in the cities, in the fields, in the oceans, in the rivers? Why couldn't we look forward? Why couldn't we see the bigger picture? This was never really meant to be about history or photography. I wanted to explore spirituality and make art I feel proud of. And making music at Merivale, while the moon set and the sun rose, honestly did feel like magic. It felt like an offering to ancestors. And so in truth, I've just been trying to focus up a clear image of what my ancestors would see, looking out over this landscape if they were me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Does anyone have any questions?
I hope people do, and I haven't just cooked everyone's brains.
I'd like to know more.
Sorry, could you... Who's speaking?
I don't need a microphone.
Yes, you do. The people at home can't hear you.
Oh, I see. I'd forgotten about
There's
that.
millions of viewers
I have
online
got quite
right
a
now.
loud voice. So what I wanted to know about was a little bit more about your trip in July. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a while in the making. This is a project I've wanted to happen for a couple of years now. So I reached out to them over a year ago. The way that I see it working is I want to build instruments that I put into the cave alongside a couple of singers and other musicians. And then there are two caves that we can use that have art in them. One of them is a very long, thin, triangular Toblerone of a cave. And the other one is a very resonant space. And so you can do this thing where if you clap and record it, you can record what's called an impulse response, which is like the characteristics of the space. So there's as much in terms of collecting and building a palette of sounds as there are in terms of trying to get other sonic qualities from the cave. And then those collaborators that are coming, some of them are really good instrument builders, both analog, electronic circuits, digital stuff, and so I'm hoping the people that come are going to respond creatively to it as well. We've got a dancer, we've got a projection mapping specialist. I just want to avoid putting a TV in a cave. And then the intention is to take all of that kind of learnings and exploration over those 2 days, document it, and then use it as a palette for making this kind of touring show. But the other collaborators who come are kind of, as long as the museum, Craswell Crags, are happy with it, are free to kind of make what they will. I just want them to be generous with what they make. And then, yeah, put it out, really. I'm really interested in trying to build a secular experience and ideally perform this in spaces like caves or old churches, just resonant, unusual spaces that are psychologically different to be in than just a traditional venue. So that's the intention.
So secular, not spiritual.
I think if it's the argument that David Lewis Williams makes is that it's biologically hardwired into us to see, to interpret the world in what he calls the tiered cosmos. So there's a seemingly, because of our nervous system, there is a tendency for us to think of an underground world and a sky world. And so his argument is that going into a cave is going into this other world, and as such is an analogy for going into one's own subconsciousness. And so that's where I feel that trying to build a secular experience that pulls on those spiritual threads might be just beneficial or might be enjoyable regardless of someone's actual spiritual beliefs. I want to be respectful for people who have strong religious beliefs or have created their own beliefs, but also to people who don't feel that. Because I haven't had a religious experience. Music is the closest thing I feel, but I've not heard a voice of God ever in my life. But I recognize the power in it, and if it's seemingly a big part of being human, perhaps that's a good thing to tap into, regardless of the story behind it.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hey, so I was interested in this idea of sort of these spaces like the stone circles and the cave have this sense of sort of locational permanence in a way maybe the people who were going there and having their rituals or having their meeting place knew that space was going to be there for them. And I guess I was interested in whether you've been sort of considering at a time when the arts is quite nomadic, like a lot of our venues are being shut down or artists are evicted all the time, kind of how that contrasts for you in terms of our experiences of this stuff now.
That's a really interesting question. I think what's interesting about cave art in particular is these migratory people. So it was a colder landscape, but it was, it was like the steppe in Mongolia. It was a big, vast grassland, and seemingly they would follow the herds and move around. So is that kind of nomadicism, if that's a word, it's very ingrained. And quite a lot of hunter-gatherer societies, especially in the Amazon, up and move. They don't have a permanent base. That is not to try and romanticize the threats that we face. I think our cities and our entire existences are predicated on permanence. And I think it's very hard at the moment, especially that exact problem that I had where I was really only thinking about art through the eyes of capitalism, and found it very hard to think that there might be community or relations beyond that. So I don't really have an answer for why or what good could come of those closures. I think it's terrible. Like, I owe this space, the PM studio, pretty much everything. My career, meeting my wife, you know. I feel like it's a space I've been able to grow as a person. I'm always impressed what comes out of Bristol Community Modular as well, having all these disparate people come together and build something. But I wonder if trying to build more community, no, I don't have an answer for you really. It's something I'm thinking about.
Any other questions? Joe.
Hi. Yeah, I haven't quite worked out this question, James, but I'm interested if you're experiencing a tension between your core belief around the kind of the fear of acceleratism and the impact that it's having on us and our experience. I think you talked about the fact that you feel like it's kind of, there's a risk that we're losing something quite fundamental and that's happening quite quickly. A tension between that idea and then this idea of kind of foundational human experience, and that we can see ourselves as intellectually the same as the people that were kind of making cave art many thousands of years ago. And the relationship between those two ideas feels tricky to me.
That's interesting. How so?
I suppose it makes me like wonder, is there always a tendency that we have to see our current time as like does that notion of fear of accelerism play into the myth of accelerism? Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, there's like a
everything's changing
romanticizing the past.
Yeah,
danger.
like I'm scared that everything's changing so fast now because there's something particular special about the time I'm living in that sits in tension with an idea of like continuity of human experience.
There's definitely people that, you know, I was concerned with two things with this talk. One was being that meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where there's like red lines everywhere and he's like smoking a cigarette and drinking coffee. He's like, yeah, I've uncovered a, you know, a
I think it was a really great talk. I really enjoyed it.
And the other one was coming across as a Luddite. And that's not what I mean. I think tool making is really important, coming back to the, you know, the hand axes. What I think about though is from the Industrial Revolution to the way that technology is shaping and changing our lives, that kind of belief has been drawn on from really talk club and doing Samaritans and talking to people, and the kind of epidemic of loneliness and the difficulty of being able to communicate how one feels, and that being something that is largely being solved kind of by a product space, whether that's private therapy or, you know, headspace or whatever, which aren't bad things at all, but there are these normal human activities like making art for making art or talking to someone on a foundational basis, which that being normalized, or living in a village of some kind of people that you see every day who ask you how you are, that is less prevalent than ever. And that's where I feel those kind of foundational human experiences, and I do not have a prescription, are really important for like reconnection and feeling human again. Not the best answer, but that's the one I got.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello. Ruth says, I like the British Pilgrimage Trust's approach to walking the old ways, i.e. bringing your own spirituality. She's thinking about how they were walking to a space with equipment, how you were walking to a space with equipment, and that being hard work, and wondering about the journeying and the walking to the space as being part of what makes it spiritual or special.
The whole like thing of like something not being easy kind of makes it worthwhile. Mostly I was trying to not get chased by a horse. If I'm being honest, there was a lot of horses in that field, and I was like, oh God. Also, taking lots of my most precious items and leaving them on the side of a hill to go back to the car. Also, there is like an element of pilgrimage to it, I suppose, in the sense of like having to make a journey and having to go to like quite a remote, specific place. And also being out, like we had to hike up there at 3 a.m. And I have not done a nighttime hike since Duke of Edinburgh Bronze when I was 16. So that was all kind of a very visceral experience, you know, and I think it's something I'll remember for a long time. But mostly I was just reflecting on how out of shape I felt. If I'm being honest, it was quite a lot of heavy stuff. But, you know, like over-exercising is one way that you can enter an altered state of consciousness, you know. Rapid breathing and dance is like a particular version. I don't think it helped. I think I mostly just felt sweaty. But.
Any other questions from the audience?
If you're interested in this project, please do leave me your email address. And I'm around for the whole of the afternoon. And I would just love to hear people's thoughts and reactions and ideas and all of that jazz. This is a project that's really exciting me and like keeping me up at night in a good way. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.
So thank you again to Jim. All right, before you all go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, then please come find one of the studio team. Studio team, give us a wave. There we are. If you're watching online, please drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you all again next time.